Well, welcome everyone. We're super thrilled to have Ezra Klein here. As you all know, he's the editor-in-chief of Vox.com, and he's here in a conversation with Richard Gingras, who is our senior director of Google News and social products. And our team is really, really excited to see that you guys are so interested in the intersection of technology and media. And I just know we're going to learn a ton from today's talk with Ezra, as Vox and numerous other web-only media organizations are really disrupting the industry and building something really special from the ground up. And so if you guys have questions, we have a Dory, go/Ezra Klein. You have your own Go link. So it'll be easier to isolate the questions.
I'm gonna nod like I know what that means. Sounds great.
It's just a democratic way of asking questions at the very end. We'll also be passing a microphone if you guys want to ask the questions live as well. And with that, Richard, take it away.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Got another good crowd. We've been doing a series of these, and we'll continue to do so with a large focus of sort of looking at looking behind the news and talking to people, particularly those who are really working on the cutting edge of trying to move every dimension of journalism forward into this exciting and challenging new ecosystem that we all consume information through today. So let's talk a little bit about Ezra. For those who aren't aware of his background, over the last decade, he has actually a stellar and long career, even though you're 30 years old. There's a kind of a multiple in there with regard to me, but we won't go there. But over the last decade, you've built a great reputation as a political reporter, columnist, blogger. In 2009, Ezra joined the Washington Post, where he managed the Wonkblog, being a policy wonk as you are, card-carrying policy wonk, I believe.
We do give out cards now,
we do, yeah. It's important we do so. Which included the work not only of Ezra, but other political writers at the Post as well, and it very quickly became the most popular blog at the Post. In 2010, not long thereafter, The Week named him Blogger of the Year. As Ezra is, I've known Ezra for a bit. He's attended at least one of our Newsgeist unconferences, and we've talked a lot about the future of news and how how that ecosystem needs to evolve. And I think what was clear is as Ezra's work evolved over the last decade, I think he became increasingly intrigued with that notion of how should approaches to journalism and political coverage change to meet the needs and differences of the times. He tried to do that at the Post, but I think had limited ability to do that within the confines of the Post, at least at that time. We'll see how Jeff Bezos evolves the culture of that organization to drive further innovation. But given that he really couldn't have the kind of license that he wanted at the Post, in January last year, he joined Vox Media to create and launch Vox.com. Vox Media, as many of you know, is the media company that started SB Nation and The Verge, headed by Jim Bankoff, and they've been doing interesting things. His expressed objective with Vox with Vox.com specifically, Ezra's objective, was to focus more on providing not just the day-to-day inside the beltway, back and forth of the political sphere, but really tried to get in and provide more context, more background explainers to give people a better sense of the issues and how they should look at them, think about them. So Ezra, welcome to Google.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. As you know, I've been a very strong and vocal proponent in the industry regarding both the need and the opportunity to rethink the models from the ground up. Not because everything's broken, but simply because everything is different. Some of the things are broken, but everything is indeed different from how people consume media, how they interact with media, how they interact with sources of media, the tools you have, the workflows, the different workflows, the very nature that the definition of a news product can be dramatically different from what we've seen in the past. And I know that's been very much part of your thinking with Vox. So why don't we just start off with the big question of what's your vision with Vox, and then we can kind of probe further into the details.
Sure. So thank you guys for having me. It's exciting to be here. I'm excited to see somebody with a Vox shirt. I'm excited to see a menorah on the window. Things are going well for me. So as Richard said, I covered policy and politics at the Post for 5 years. Before that, I was at the American Prospect. And the focus of my work has always been policy, particularly healthcare policy, economic policy, from roughly 2008 to 2012, the complete and utter collapse of the global financial system. It's been a good ride of things going terribly for the world. And that has been, on the one hand, a lot of fun, because I came into all this through a back door. I didn't want to be a journalist. I'd never thought about being a journalist. I started a blog, and things kind of took on some momentum from there when I was in college. But what I learned in blogging was that actually you had this incredible ability to develop audiences and dig into topics that simply didn't work that well in traditional news formats. When you're covering sort of something like Obamacare, these sort of really thorny, big, complex systems, writing about it once isn't good enough. I came up through magazines. I went to the American Prospect, and I interned at the Washington Monthly. And I remember we'd always be in these editorial meetings, and you would always have to convince the editor that whatever you're going to say was new. And so we'd say, well, I got this idea, I think it's a good idea, and I would agree. And then they'd be like, yeah, but the New Republic did that in June of 2004. And it's like, so? Nobody read the New Republic doing that in June 2004, and if they did, they don't remember it. I've probably written 7,000 articles on Obamacare. And what frustrated me about that experience was that I was building something that I thought had value to the reader, which was a body of knowledge about Obamacare. I actually have read the damn bill. And I don't recommend it, by the way. If you want to do something, I recommend doing something other than reading the Obamacare bill. But I would get every day these emails from readers who, what they needed to know were the basics of what was going on. What were the exchanges? How did the subsidies work? How did the mandate work? But the news does not prize the basics, right? The basics get locked in actually pretty early. The news prizes the parts of it that will change, and then the parts of it that are in conflict every day. And so while those are the parts with the news pegs, the things that your editors actually want from you, the things that feel new, you can actually say, well, look, a politician said X, so I'm writing a thing about X. They're not the thing that the reader needs the most. So one thing I recognized while doing this coverage was that as much as myself and then later Sarah Cliff, who's by far, I think, the best healthcare reporter in the country, were really, I think, doing a pretty good job covering Obamacare, certainly trying to. We were not building the thing our readers needed. We were building an incredibly fractured knowledge base that you couldn't get to unless you had just incredible Google foo. This is what got me thinking a lot about whether we were doing the news right in the digital age. And the more I gave this thought, I sort of came to think there were three, and arguably four, but for me 3 relevant differences between doing print journalism, which structured even digital journalism to a greater degree than I think people realize, and doing purely digital journalism. The first difference is speed. And we, as an industry, figured out how to do that. We probably figured that one out too well. I think if anything, we're a little bit too fast. But we figured out that you could be much faster online than you ever could be in print. So speed, you can put the check in that box. The second was length. And I'd give us like a C- on length. An economist will always tell you, in any industry, what you want to look for is the relevant scarcity. You want to look for the thing people don't have enough of, because that is going to drive what they do. In journalism, the fundamental scarcity has always been the number of pages. You have 64 in a magazine, you have whatever number you had, given the advertising you had in that day's newspaper, and everything was shaped by this incredibly ruthless competition for column inches. At the Washington Post, at the New York Times, you don't talk about how many words a story is. You literally talk about it in inches. This was very confusing to me when they would say, how long is your story? And I would say 800 words. And they would say, how many inches? And I would say, it's the internet. It doesn't have inches. But that was the right way to think, right? You had to lay out a paper. It is about inches. So an enormous amount of how we did our work was about how do we give people the absolute most information in the least amount of space. And we made, as an industry, an enormous number of decisions and compromises and concessions to the tyranny of page length. The way we write articles, reverse pyramid style, is a mixture of dealing with the problems of the telegraph, because if you get cut off, well, the parts that got cut off can just be lopped off. It doesn't matter. And then secondarily, it is about getting the max amount of information into the minimum amount of space. You don't have that problem on the internet. Did any of y'all read Clickhole? Good. It's a future of news. Clickhole had a piece recently that said, I'm going to maybe mangle the headline a bit, but I went on this whaling trip and it completely changed my life. And you clicked in, it was the entire text of Moby Dick. Which was a great joke, because y'all laughed. But it's also a profound thing to think about, right? They put up the entire text of Moby Dick, which is even longer than Obamacare, I think, on a per-word level. And, although I haven't checked that. And then they just published a bunch of other articles. A world in which you can put up the entire text of Moby Dick and then anything else you want is a really different world. It is a really different world. And in journalism, I think we're only just beginning to figure out what being unleashed from length means. I think we are very, very young at that. I mean, even in my experience at all kinds of magazines and newspapers, you'll have people do these incredible pieces that we get sent all over the world to do. And the piece really should be 10,000 words. But it'll get lopped down to 1,600 or 2,300 for the magazine or for the paper. And then we won't, not because we think it's better, just because that's what we need to do, then we won't put the real version online. We somehow bring the constraint of print online. So there are times when we're getting past that now and times when we aren't. So I'd give us a partial pass on that. The third thing, and the thing I think people don't think enough about, is persistence. The web is persistent in a way print is not. If you don't ever throw out your newspapers and magazines, they will eventually grow mold and you will inhale it and die. It is very important to throw out print news. That is a really profound way of thinking, right? That the articles you do every day or every week or every month are going to be trash, are going to be, to a first approximation, inaccessible to the readership. Fundamentally, the publishing tools built for the web and the way we do news on the web actually apes that, even though it really doesn't need to. We structure our home pages by the newest stuff, the stuff that is happening right now. The other stuff goes into the archives. It's not very findable. You can go click and search. I mean, there are things you can do. And everyone has a search product for their own website that is just wildly inferior to Google. So there are things you guys do particularly. But in general, those archives become radically less valuable with every passing day. The thing that I am obsessed with, and the thing that Vox is obsessed with, is persistence. Because that, to me, is the answer for the problem I had with Obamacare. Persistence allows me to write 7,000 Obamacare articles, filter the relevant and changing information, pull the body of knowledge in those articles out into something coherent, continuously update it. And instead of constantly creating new things where we redo the work, simply update the thing we have. And instead of redoing 90% of the work or 95% of the work, change 5% of the work. And I can give you guys a slew of examples, ranging from, we have these card stacks, which are kind of the body of knowledge solution. Not that we have figured that out, but we are working on it. And that is where we sort of take ongoing news stories and build out a sort of modular, continuously updated topic resource on them that we can always attach to articles, so that anybody coming into the news midstream, you're coming into Obamacare 9 months after the discussion has started, you're looking into what's going on in Syria years after the civil war has begun, we have the thing where we can say, here's where you get caught up, here's where we can give you what you need to know to understand all the other news stories we're writing. But in other ways too, we did a feature, we sent Sarah Cliff to Vermont to report on their effort to do single payer. She did an incredible feature from Vermont. 6 months later, Vermont's single payer collapsed. Their effort collapsed. So she did another feature. What that feature did was it was 40% or 50% new work, and then 50% the contextual parts of her original piece that were still relevant. That gave us the ability to be much more efficient. What single payer is, what Vermont had been trying to do had not changed. All that work was relevant. A lot of it is just getting past the discomfort we feel, discomfort that I think is born of the lessons and habits we learned from print, with simply reusing our work efficiently. So for me, what we need to figure out is really speed, which I think we're pretty far on, length, which I think we've done some work on as an industry but are not there, and persistence, which I think we are nowhere on. And if you were building a news organization, if the news was invented today as opposed to, in the past, I think the way those three things interacted with it would just be tremendously different. And it's going to take us a while to figure out how to do that. But for me, what Vox is about, what measures our success to me, is not just unique visitors a month or page views or any of these sort of other raw metrics. In the long run, it's whether or not we are actually building a sort of truly digital, genuinely more efficient newsroom that allows us to serve our readers better and do better work more efficiently.
So let's talk a little bit further about persistence, because as you point out, I think it's an absolutely crucial dimension to how journalists think about the future. And to your point about inches, I mean, it's always, because in the prior era it was edition oriented, and yesterday's stuff went away. Yesterday's stuff went into the archive, went into the morgue, right? I mean, that's what they called it, where content went to die. And obviously in this realm it doesn't. I mean, persistence is a key attribute of the web in general. Wikipedia proves that every day, right? Persistent links have value, build value over time. You have approached this with the card stacks. So talk a little bit more about the card stacks. How are they working? How are your users responding to them? What do you think is good about them? Where would you like to take them?
Sure. Am I allowed to curse at Google?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Oh, good.
Gosh darn it.
The card stacks are fucking hard. They are by far the hardest thing we do. So for those of you who don't have Vox shirts, the card stacks are, we built out this metaphor around the index cards that some of us used in high school. And the idea was, sort of the initial idea of Vox was, could we create these topic guides continuously updated that would appear under every article? Somebody correctly noted that would be very long. So the brilliant UX designers at Vox kind of came up with this cards concept where, so Obamacare, for instance, is a card stack. It, I think, has roughly 30 cards. The first one will be, what is Obamacare? Another one will be, what is a health insurance exchange? Another one will be, how does the individual mandate work? Another one will be, is Obamacare popular? A third will be, we're not at third at that point. Anyway. Point is, they are very detailed. The idea is that we do our daily news reporting and we filter that reporting into them. The cards themselves can be pulled apart. We can attach any individual one to a story. They take a tremendous amount of work to do at the front end. If we'd been doing this for years, it would be easier. It would be more of a flywheel, to use the metaphor that seems so dominant out here. But to just start one up from the beginning is just a lot of work. We have roughly 120 of them now, roughly. We have learned a lot of lessons. I'll walk through some of them. We are actually doing a big editorial sort of V2 on card stacks right now that we're rolling out internally in the next week or so. And we're in the midst of a huge product redesign on card stacks. I mean, card stacks are something we really hack together. And so I think they're going to improve rapidly. But we've been learning a lot. We had no way to know how to do this before we did it. And one of the reasons it's been so hard is that there actually aren't examples for us to follow. Everything else, there's so much great work being done on the web by so many people that you can do really rapid best practices discovery. On card stacks, not at all. So the initial theory of card stacks conceived of them as a reference material. I think we really thought of them in terms of the article format. So you would have an article, and articles almost by necessity have a lot of jargon in them. I'm going to keep using Obamacare as an example here, if people don't mind. You have to talk about insurance exchanges, the individual mandate, subsidies, the medical loss ratio. These are things that you actually don't, there's not a more precise term out there for them. Those are just the terms. So what we imagined was these cards that would actually have really detailed explanations of the core concepts in a news story. So we designed a discovery mechanism for them that was really based around the article. So you have this yellow highlighting in articles. It signifies a card is here. We can attach the card into the article. And we write them, and initially wrote them as reference materials. So we kind of thought about what is each piece of a story that we might need to refer back to a lot. As we watched user behavior on the cards, That is not how people use them. They did go from the articles occasionally. I mean, it's not that it didn't happen. But the really big wins in card stacks, and what we really found that surprised us, when people went into a card, they read about 8 cards. That is a tremendous number on the internet. Our bounce rate was in the single digits, which for every news story I've ever seen, it's usually between 70 to 100%. So people were going in, and they were going in deep. And the way people were finding them, primarily for the ones that really worked, was that they were searching them out. It was not somebody coming and reading an article and saying, oh, I don't understand that word. It was somebody coming and saying, I don't understand Obamacare. I don't understand the Israel-Palestine conflict. I don't understand Bitcoin. The answer is nobody understands Bitcoin. But, so this forced a real overhaul. We had not even designed discovery mechanisms that were consonant to that. Like, there was actually not a home for the card stacks. We built a home for the card stacks. We built a search for the card stacks. But the real challenge, that was how we were writing them. We were writing them as reference materials that were meant to be, in many ways, broken up and disaggregated. We've moved much more towards writing them as full topic guides that are meant to be consumed by somebody really sort of trying to dig deep. And so we're doing a lot of editorial revision on sort of what are the best ways to do a card stack and how to think about the writing of it. But it is much more, we almost think of it much more like writing a feature now than we think of it like writing Wikipedia or an encyclopedia entry. And there's going to be a lot of product changes in the coming months that will be aligned to that, which unfortunately I can't talk about yet. But we are sort of overall, I would say that we've actually moved very dramatically. Now, you also asked, how are they performing? The answer is there's incredible variability in how are they performing. A lot of it has to do with you people. They perform really well when they're at the top of the Google results. So we had a card stack on ISIS, which is just an exceptional piece of work by a writer named Zach Beecham. And that card stack on ISIS was very, very early in the conflict with ISIS, very early in their rise. It's structured, the structure is one of our sort of normal ones, which we call X facts. I think it's at this point 17 facts about ISIS in Iraq. You should know. Each card, it begins with sort of, ISIS used to be Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Each card is sort of organized around like some crucial idea in the conflict. That card stack generated a tremendous amount of inbound linking, which led to a sharp rise in the Google rankings. It's been read, I can't remember if this is a page view or the reader number, but it's been something more than 12 million or 15 million times at this point. So that's a huge success. That's one of our biggest. And we've had others that are like that. That's our highest ranked one, but we've had others that have been huge successes. Then we've had a number that have just done nothing at all. So one thing we're trying to figure out is how to deal a little bit with the variability better. One thing we're trying to understand better is like the beautiful mysteries of Google. But in general, like what we are trying to figure out how to do is, because we, to be honest, don't know it ourselves, is how do we tell people about these things? How do we let them know this is there for them when they need it, right? Because the people who most need the card stack are the people who don't know to look for it. And so the thing that we are struggling with, and I think have some cool ideas on, but the thing we are dealing with and trying to figure out is really about the distribution. Like, I'm pretty confident at this point, particularly in the newer versions of the product. We just released one on the European debt crisis, which I think is just exceptional, by Matt Iglesias. But I don't know yet, I have theories, but I don't know yet how to match the card stack itself with the people who need it. Because the people coming to Vox to read about the European debt crisis, well, they might in fact be interested in reading the card stack. They're actually almost the opposite of the intended audience, right? And so trying to figure that match out better is, I think, our big challenge here. When they work, it is just the most beautiful thing to me. It's the thing I'm happiest about at Vox. But I want to get the number of them working up higher. So I'd say they've been successful. We've gotten good traffic off of them. I'd say that we've learned a ton, which is the point of the first 8 months of it. But we have a long way to go to build the resource, build the accessible resource that we want people to have.
Right. Great. We want to open this up a bit. As I mentioned, we've got people who've been putting questions into the Dory today. The one that's been voted to the top is going to play right to the deepest heart of your policy wonk nature.
All right.
With a massively open question that I'll be very interested to see what your answer is. If you could pass one constitutional amendment What would it be?
Constitutional amendments. That's good because they're scary things, constitutional
This is like
amendments.
Stump the Chump.
No, I like it. All right, so my biggest concern in American politics is the interaction between party polarization and a disaggregated checks and balance oriented system. So when I think about what you need to change in American politics, basically my argument is that party polarization is not a transient phenomenon. It is the equilibrium of a multi-party democracy. And the sort of what is seen as the sort of golden age of American politics, a sort of mid-20th century period in which the parties were non-polarized, where you could have a hardcore conservative like Strom Thurmond in the Democratic Party and a hardcore liberal like, hey, George Romney in the Republican Party. That is the aberration. That is the thing that didn't make sense. The problem is we have a political system that does not work with polarization. The aberration was about race. When race receded from the front of American politics, the aberration began to resolve itself, and now we are in a position where we have essentially parliamentary-style parties without parliamentary-style rules. So if I were going to start amending the Constitution, and I want to be very clear that if left to my own devices, I would not, because I think constitutional amendments are very tough things, but within the context of the question, I would be looking to move America closer to a parliamentary-style political system, wherein the president and the majority in Congress are matched in a clearer way than is currently the case. It is a troubling fact, if you think about it long enough, that America is the only constitutional presidential democracy of its kind to last for an extremely long time. Virtually every other system constructed like ours has collapsed for a very simple reason, that there is no constitutional way to resolve disputes between the executive, which has democratic legitimacy, and the legislature, which also has democratic legitimacy. So when you get into something like congressional Republicans say they won't raise the debt ceiling, and Barack Obama says you got to raise the debt ceiling, we don't actually have an answer to that, except for, well, we better come up with one. Now, maybe we always will, but I'm not confident in that. So I would be looking to move us towards something where there are clearer lines of accountability and less possibility of catastrophic breakdown. It's, by the way, a very notable thing that we have helped a number of other countries develop their political systems. You think of the countries we occupied after World War II, like Japan. We have not pushed them towards ours. And the reason is actually pretty well known in the literature that this kind of system is unstable. It's worked in America because we've had, one, we're just fucking awesome, but two, we've had traditionally very diffuse parties. It's really unusual. But the, I think, specific unique qualities of our democracy and our party system that have allowed it to work are slowly vanishing. And I think it's putting us in a position that lends itself to very dangerous crises.
Great answer. Let's turn to the people in the room. Question? Yes.
So when talking about card stacks, you made a distinction between Wikipedia style and featured. Can you elaborate on that?
Of course. So for those, I'm not sure if everybody heard, so he was saying that I made a distinction between writing these card stacks the way you'd write a Wikipedia article and saying now that we think of them a little bit more like a feature article. In journalism, features have a kind of fuzzy meaning that makes sense internally, and I'll try to make it make sense externally, but it's a meaning that has come to be used in the word long form. Feature stories are lengthy, deep, detailed, heavily reported, although not always, pieces that are meant to be read through from the beginning to the end. Whereas I think Wikipedia, one of its great strengths is it is a reference material that is not actually meant to be read through beginning to end. It is episodic. It is in many ways modular. I don't know how y'all use Wikipedia, but I go and I go to the little box and I click on the part of the box I need, and then I go down to that anchor tag in the story. So as opposed to trying to write these stacks in this kind of context where what we are doing is fundamentally defining the terms and giving relevant information about the topic, we are moving it more towards a style which we think a lot about when we think about the word explaining, which has, influences coverage much beyond card stacks, we are trying to give people a sense of the bigger picture and the context. We talk a lot internally about the difference between offering a definition and offering an explanation. And I think that too much of our early work, our early card stacks, push towards definitions. This is what an insurance exchange is in words that are not insurance exchange, as opposed to trying to explain, like, listen, we've been working with this topic a lot. We've done a lot of reporting on it. We've done a lot of research on it. We've done a lot of thinking on it. This is what we think is kind of the bigger picture here. This is what we think you need to understand it. And I'll give a specific example on this because I know that's a little fuzzy. The European debt crisis. One way to approach the first card in that is to say, what is the European debt crisis? Or what is the European currency zone, or whatever you might want to do? And to sort of very tightly try to answer that question. The European debt crisis is a situation in which a number of European countries have seen their risk level rise up in the markets, and as such, they're unable to pay, they're unable to issue new debt. They are trying to get it from the European Central Bank, but the European Central Bank does not want to print money for them. You can describe the economics of it. The way we did it is, Matt Iglesias, who's covered this a lot, says basically, the fundamental thing you need to understand is that the Eurozone is a political union that is also a currency union. The reason they are doing all of these things that do not make economic sense and are leading to persistent economic crisis, is that achieving the political objective of furthering integration between the various countries of Europe has trumped the economic objectives of the Eurozone, at least temporarily. And so trying in that way to not just sort of say, here's everything you kind of need to know to understand the words used in an article about it, but to try to say, as you would in a feature piece where you'd gone and like reported in Europe for a month, and to really try and say, here's what we think is really going on here. Here's what you need to know, not just to follow along, but to understand it. But that's fuzzy. I would like to be able to draw that line more precisely than I'm able to.
It sounded like you were saying that, if I understood you correctly, that your audience for the cards is different from your audience for the news. Is that correct?
No, there's an overlap. There is some difference, right? So cards are likely to be found, for instance, by Google search, which is not untrue for news articles, but a lot more of our, say, daily news audience is recurrent people who like coming to the Vox.com homepage or follow us on Twitter or follow us on Facebook, whereas a greater percentage of the card audience is people searching for a specific topic knowledge who never intended to come specifically to Vox.
Okay. So my question is, are you doing anything to try to bring those audiences more together, so to pull one over to the other side, pull the card audiences more into your news side and the news side more into the card? And then related to that, a lot of what you've been saying assume or goes against a lot of the assumptions in news organizations that people who are reading things online have a very short attention span, so everything needs to be very short. So, but you have a very different take on that. So if you could answer both of those questions, I think they're really
Definitely.
Thank you.
So in terms of trying to convert the card stack audience to a daily Vox audience, there are different things you can do there. We have some level of links into the content. We have, at the end of the cards, you can explore other cards. I think our idea is that we want to build something that is more like an internet utility, and that the best way to build the audience for the cards, which is fundamentally the aim there, is to just make that experience as good as we can. Without saying too much about our plans, I would say we're actually moving further away from trying to push people in the cards to other Vox content, and moving more towards just making the cards the experience we think they should be, and as useful an experience as they can be. Ultimately, I think the best thing for Vox is that people across the vast acreage of the internet come to rely on and find useful the card stacks, and I think that the rest of the site will benefit dramatically from that. But I'm not trying to use one as sort of a selling point for the other. To your other question about length, in some ways I think I'd give other news organizations a little bit more credit. I think that something we've all discovered in recent years is that long form works really well on the web, that people's attention spans are way beyond what we give them credit for. Now, a lot of short stuff works really well too, and Vox has a combination of both. We do all kinds of stuff. But it just is not my experience that readers punish you for going into detail. the majority of the stuff we do that does the best is actually pretty detailed, pretty long. And the truth is, if you even, I think about other organizations and outlets, it's often true. To use sort of, I think, a player who a lot of people would imagine is like the apotheosis of short on the internet, which is BuzzFeed. If you really look at what they do, for instance, they are very intent on signaling how long things are going to be. They do not have lists of 7 things or 3 things or 9 things. It's 42 things only children from 1993 will understand, right? I mean, it's about showing that there's going to be a level of comprehensiveness and length in here. In general, I think the internet rewards work. I think that it rewards stuff that people find valuable. A lot of the short stuff that works well on the internet tends to not actually be short. What it tends to be is an embed of something long. So people, I think, will often say, like, a John Oliver video does really well across a number of news sites. That's short. But actually, it's a 17-minute video about state legislatures and why they're corrupt. So to the reader, it's very long. So I think that, to some degree, I think we underestimate the internet audience a lot on this stuff. I think there's a really significant audience of people who want, good content. The big polarization, I think, in terms of online news is between people who want it and people who don't. But once you're bought in, once you're one of the people who've decided as a hobby in your life you're going to read the news, you tend to be, I think, into a lot of good stuff.
I think the term, I'm going to go to the crowd in the cloud again for a second here. I think the term utility
It's weird interacting with all these real people at Google.
I know, it's true. They're actually projections. I think the word utility is a good one, and a phrase that I've often used is knowledge utility. And we had a panel here recently, part of the same series, with investigative journalists from ProPublica, Center for Investigative Journalism. ProPublica has been creating knowledge utilities off of data.
Yep.
How can I find a dialysis treatment center and understand whether they're better or worse than 1
They
2
do
miles
incredible
away?
jobs with that. It's
Great
really
work.
great work.
Their newsrooms right now are in the area of 20% data journalists. So I'm curious, at Vox, what's your view on data journalism? How much of it is a part of what you're doing, what you want to do?
We have some exciting data journalism announcements coming. Okay, I have complicated ideas on this, so enjoy your long answer. Also, was that a cloud question or was that your question?
That was a cloud question.
Oh, okay, all right. You spoke it so eloquently. Okay, data journalism. We have often been grouped as a data journalist outlet with a bunch of others like 538 and The Upshot and other things like that started roughly around the time we did. I have not thought of us as a data journalism shop just because we have not really built out that capacity yet. Now, our journals have to be data literate. We have a very high premium on knowing how to do the basic work of working with spreadsheets, of working with graphs, charts, tables, maps. We have a lot of people who can do regressions. It's not like some mysterious other language in the newsroom. So I've tried very hard to integrate those skills, but we've not built too big of a separate team, although we're going to be making some hires pretty shortly in that area, or announcing some hires pretty shortly in that area. But let me talk for a minute just about what I think it is, because this is where we're going with it, and it's one reason it's taken us some time to get there. I think that data journalism has frequently been conflated, not by ProPublica, but by the sort of media conversation with data visualization.
Right.
Right. You put up a graph and people are like, haha, data journalism. And no, that's a graph. It's a chart. That's why I put in one chart as opposed to in one piece of data journalism in the headline. There is a lot of performance of data on the internet right now, much of which I have been a big part in pushing. So it's great. I hope you all share it on Facebook. But that is not data journalism. To me, what is interesting about data journalism, to me what makes data journalism journalism, is what you are doing is you are figuring out ways to create data information sources that you are then using to find and report stories.
Right.
So to talk about Nate Silver for a minute, what was amazing about Nate's work on the election is that, and I think it was often misunderstood, because people get very oh my God, math. Nate had created a model that was feeding a spreadsheet. And every day that spreadsheet was giving Nate a story about the election. Nate was the chief correspondent of Nate Silver's spreadsheet. That was an amazing thing to be because he had a monopoly over those stories. And those stories are better than most of the other stories people were writing. So to me, that was data journalism. Nate had found a way to pull data sources into a comprehensible, usable format that could then inform a stream of ongoing stories. Data journalism to me is doing journalism off of data. And so when I think about how we're going to do it and when I think about how it needs to be done, I think that there's been too much talking about like pretty interactives and graphics and too little about the actual data side of journalism, which is what information sources are going to use, how are you going to make them into something that's telling you true facts about the world or at least leading you towards ways of finding true facts about the world, then how you make that information accessible to your journalists, and then how will you make it accessible and transparent to your readers. So we're going to be pushing into that. I think we have some cool ideas there. But I think that for me, we've had a lot of data visualization at Vox. We're reasonably good at that. But data journalism is a much harder thing. ProPublica is really one of the leaders in it. And it is...
Making money from it.
Yes, I can't speak to them.
No, they are.
Yeah, so that's great. I'm a big fan of journalism that makes money. So if it turns out data journalism is money journalism, that's even better. That's my favorite kind of journalism data. But so to me, like I don't think Vox has pushed far in that yet. We've done a lot of data visualization, but we are building out the capacity and building out a number of things required for us to do this sort of separate thing that I think of as data journalism, which is not just my reporter knows how to use a spreadsheet.
I want to shift, if we can, to another dimension of the architecture of news. And this deals to me with the facet of credibility.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the internet is an extraordinary thing. It's broadened expression tremendously. Of course, there's more wheat, there's more chaff. It's a maelstrom of expression, and anyone with a thought can do so. And as we know, it's also great at amplifying untruths as well as it is truths. Right. Unfortunately, in this era, it becomes increasingly hard right now to differentiate between the good and the bad. We've started a project, Sally Lehrman is here, who's also an esteemed journalist and a fellow at the Markkula Center for Ethics. And we've started an initiative, within the industry called the Trust Project, which really pokes at the notion of how can we, in the industry, evolve the model of journalism such that more dimensions that support the credibility of the work are there. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that quality news organizations, and I'd put yours in that, are doing the necessary things to support this, right? You have expertise. You do deep work that supports your conclusions. You have editorial workflows where people double check your work and mm-hmm. sign off on it. Yet most of this is not exposed to the audience at all. Yeah. Right? I don't know that Adam Ellick's story at the New York Times went through 3 weeks of editing with editors and lawyers before he put it up on the web, where it was then rewritten 500 times by others who did not have expertise and didn't do his work. Mm-hmm. So I'd really love to get your thoughts as you think about Vox's evolution of its models as to what you think you might do to really buttress the notion that you do have that credibility and expertise to get me to be comfortable trusting what you say.
So this is a really hard problem. And it is a harder problem now than it's even been at any other time when I've been doing this, because so many people who come to your site are coming through social media, right? You're getting so many people, or even through search. So you're getting so many people who just like, they have found the link or the headline and they're coming in and they don't really know what they're getting. So it used to be, I remember back in the days of yore when I started a blog, and the way you got traffic was you got direct links from other people. And so you were getting traffic based on an implicit endorsement, correct, or at times an anti-endorsement, this guy's the stupidest idiot on the face of the earth, from someone else. And so the readership came with some understanding of what was going on. if you guys have not read Richard and his colleagues' work on the idea of the trust project on Medium, it's worth doing. It's very thought-provoking, and I know that's sort of what we're talking about here. So I've been thinking about that a lot today, and since you sent it to me, and let me tell you what worries me about all this stuff, because I really do want to find an answer to this, and I don't know how. So we invest a lot at Vox on things that I think do increase the quality of the product, right? We have a lot of editors. Everything gets edited. Everything now over 800 words gets copy edited. It gets a secondary copy edit before it goes up. When we do when we do sort of data visualization, that has a separate look and run through. We have a very tight corrections policy where we will correct. We have, in some ways, maybe too tight, but like we really try to be like, if we get anything wrong, like I wrote 2005 rather than 06, that's a correction. We put up a chart from the US Department of Agriculture. Their chart was wrong. We got them to correct their chart. We corrected our story, right? So we're doing a lot that is meant to really build up transparency and credibility with the audience. Here's where I get scared of what we know and what we don't know about how it'll end up interacting. Two things. One is formalism, right? Trust formalism. So I think of Bloomberg News here, which I've done a lot of work with. I was a columnist for Bloomberg View. Everything there, you have the name of the editor, you have the name of the copy editor. Medium actually does a nice job of this on their long form stories. Who was the illustrator? Who was the, and it's really showing you there were a lot of people who worked on this piece. On features, we actually do it too. We show on features who is the editor, who is a designer, who is a writer, who is all the different players that were involved to make the piece. The only thing I would say is that in my experience of the internet and of journalism in general, that is actually not what separates good work and bad work. It is not what separates things I think you should trust from things I think you should not. Editing is an incredibly important thing. It makes work so much better. It really is critical. And we are hiring a lot of editors. If any of you would like to be our deputy culture editor, let me know. But a lot of the true lies on the internet are edited. And a lot of them aren't even factually wrong. They're just completely incorrect. And I think there are a lot of ways if we all just start writing down our editors and our copy editors and sort of, and creating a sort of map of like how much we did on it, I worry that's going to get gamed. Because that's a model, right? It's like a clear thing, and stuff like that, if it begins to work, if Google began to put it in the algorithm, it'll get gamed like rapidly. I've just seen this before. So that worries me. And then the other thing that worries me is somehow making trust too much of a stand-in for resources. A lot of the really important thinking and a lot of the really true things on the internet come from people outside of the mainstream. For all kinds of, in some ways, obvious reasons, I think. And so, I think back to the Iraq War, when Juan Cole, who was a Middle Eastern history professor, I believe he was at U Michigan at that point, was one of the really best guides. Not literally everything he said was right, but compared to what you were getting out of the main papers, this blogger, who was just a history professor, was way better. And he was a way truer guide to it. But he would have been destroyed by something like this, right? Because he had no editors, he had no copy editors, he just had his own expertise. So when I think about this, I think of two things, and they're fuzzy, and I don't like it because I want people to know the work we're putting into what we're doing, and I just have not figured out a good solution. But one, I do think of the card stacks as being part of it for us, because I think that if you can show that you've been really working on this story a lot, you've been diving deep into it, you've been doing the job, then at least you can show your reader why they should trust you. You can show them you didn't just come to this today because you noticed on CrowdTangle it was popping on Facebook. You've been covering, say, the Bill Cosby sexual harassment things for 6 months now. You've written 200 stories. You've done a full timeline. You really know what's going on. Another thing there, which this one isn't as helpful, but is really just, and it's an old blogging thing, is showing your work, is linking to your work. I'll tell you a place where I really worry about this. We talked about the performance of data a few minutes ago. There is a bad habit journalists have, and we've done it too, I'm not exempting us, to treat whatever is in an abstract of a working paper as a true fact about the world. We use academic papers, we use academic research as some kind of synonym for this is correct, right? These people are at a university, so this is a true estimate of the macroeconomic impact of blah, 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 blah. Whereas that's very rarely, it's very rarely that simple. So something that we're thinking about a lot on this particular piece of it is how not just to show the readers we're being not just data informed, but data skeptical, but actually make sure we have processes that force our writers to know what the actual data says too, right? And I've thought a lot about, and we may actually do something like this, of having annotations in which it's boring to explain the methodology of things in a piece because you might have to do it 6 times and it's not that interesting. But if you have a strong annotation system, maybe you do want to do that. Maybe particularly when you're relying heavily on a study, you do want to be saying, here's how the study was done, here's what the sample size was. You don't need to roll over that if you don't want it, but it's there if you do want it. And then at least you know and the reader knows that the writer at least knows how the study was done. So I'm trying to think about things like that where we can somehow show not that we had the resources to do the work, or not even what our process was, but in a very specific way on this particular article, like we went deeper even than what you see here. We made sure we understood the underpinnings of it. But I'll just be flatly honest with you because I don't want to bullshit you. Like, I have not come to anything on this that I feel super good about. I do not know how to say to someone, how to show someone clearly, like, we have, for years before this, been talking to the relevant experts in this space and have come to this story with a body of knowledge. And when we tell you what's going on, even though our take maybe was less interesting than some of the hot takes by people who've not been following this in any clear way and parachuted in today, it's a more trustworthy one. I've not figured out how to do that. I'm hoping you will figure it out for me.
It's a complex problem, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't pretend that there are silver bullets, and there's a lot more to discuss there. We're almost out of time, but maybe we have time for one more fast question and a fast answer. Anyone
make no
volunteer with
promises.
one? Who's got a fast question?
Do you have any advice for Google? What could we do to help users benefit from good journalism that we aren't doing?
Aside from lifting Vox in the search rankings just as a matter of algorithmic precision, I think the thing that, I'll go back to persistence here for a minute. I think the thing that Google should be thinking about, Google News should be thinking about, maybe that Facebook should be thinking about, that others should be thinking about, is to what degree the algorithms that y'all use right now end up prizing iterative, brand new reporting all the time. To what degree recency is a measure that is actually forcing us to do things in a way that is not the best way for our readers, or that we're capable of in digital journalism. I'll use Facebook as the example here because honestly I know a little bit less about how your search works, but you actually get downgraded for putting the same URL into Facebook repeatedly, right? But if I want to do an explainer on, say, something fast moving, and instead of rewriting it all the time, I want to keep updating that and making that the very best it can be. And I can make that piece into something much richer than I could if I were having to constantly split it into new pieces. But I'm going to get penalized for doing that. And so I think that something that you guys should be thinking about is how much moving journalism onto the internet does not make it digital journalism. Just the fact that it's hosted on a web page does not get you there. And so a lot of us have built our workflows, our processes, all kinds of things in journalism and outside of it, based upon the journalism what we intuitively understand as journalism, what our habits are in journalism. And there's a lot more pressure keeping us in old workflows than people realize. The way the publishing tools are made, the way the social algorithms work, all kinds of things push us to do things kind of like they've always been done, just published on the internet. So if I were you guys, I'd be thinking long term about how to make sure that, I'm not saying you should push away from how things have been done, but how to make sure that you're not penalizing sort of non-traditional approaches to telling these stories and delivering this information.
Right. Very good point, and I think everyone here would agree with that. I want to thank you very much, Ezra, for being here with us. For your thoughtfulness, and most importantly, for your efforts to continue to move the ball forward and rethinking the future of news.
Well,
Really
thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.